The headline is historic, but the second line could rewrite the rulebook. Kawhi Leonard landing in Los Angeles turns a chase for banners into a collision with an unfolding investigation. The number circling every conversation is 28 million, attached to a no-activation endorsement routed through KL2 Aspire LLC and a failed fintech called Aspiration. The NBA calls cap circumvention its cardinal sin. Federal agencies read ledgers, not headlines. Through that lens, this is not only about a trade. It's about how modern basketball finances collide with compliance and what happens when a paper trail outlasts the cheers. If evidence outruns hype, the next big moment will not happen on hardwood. The celebration hit a wall of questions. News of Kawhi in purple and gold should have owned the day, yet attention pivoted to whether the move arrived with baggage. The figure at the center is a $28 million endorsement that reportedly required no appearances, no campaigns, and no public rollouts. The mechanism, routed through KL2 Aspire LLC, aligned with a bankrupt eco-bag called Aspiration. That framing does not prove a violation, but it sets a scene in which deliverables are absent, and intent becomes the question investigators must answer with precision. If money moved without visible work, purpose will be tested line by line. A breadcrumb in a bankruptcy file changed everything. Investigative reporter Pablo Torre describes finding KL2 Aspire LLC on Aspiration's creditor list, high enough to command attention. KL reads like Kawhi Leonard, and the number 2 matches his jersey. The clue was dull to most eyes, yet it connected a failed fintech's obligations to a player's company. From that single entry, months of follow-up followed. Calls to former staff, document requests, and a slowly widening map of entities and transfers that pushed the story beyond rumor into records. Small print became a compass that reoriented the entire search. Aspiration's branding sold virtue. The books sold doubt. California-based Aspiration offered cards that planted trees and marketed carbon offset promises. The brand drew celebrity names including Leonardo DiCaprio and Drake. That glow helps raise money, yet when a company collapses, the filings have the last word. Marketing copy can paint a vision, while ledgers draw the outline of what happened. In the gap between those two, investigators look for how a premium contract fit into a timeline that never reached a press release or a public activation. Gloss fades, but balance sheets do not forget. 7 months of reporting turned rumor into records. Torres says he reviewed more than 3,000 internal pages and spoke with 7 former employees. The document trove included an executed endorsement agreement for KL2 Aspire. What stood out was not a flashy campaign plan, but legal shelter that allowed silence. Interviews added color that the paperwork alone could not, describing how the deal was handled inside the company. Reporting of that depth does not settle the case, yet it sets the evidentiary table for those who will. Depth matters because context fills the spaces numbers cannot. Clauses that look like cushions carry consequences. One provision allowed Kawhi to decline any activation conflicting with his personal beliefs, which creates lawful room for doing nothing. Another tied payment to his status as a Clipper, a roster condition woven into a marketing contract. Those two elements together push a sponsorship into territory accountants and cap specialists study carefully. A clause can be benign alone, but in combination and in context, it can invite questions the league is obligated to ask. Language that protects can also direct where scrutiny goes. Payment routing added familiar names to the file. Funds were routed to advisor Dennis Robertson, whose involvement drew league attention in 2019 over alleged impermissible asks. A payment address does not decide intent, but it does decide who appears on bank statements and who might be asked for emails, calendars, and drafts. When the paths converge on figures with prior headlines, investigators widen the circle, and governance questions stop being theoretical points for debate on television panels. Where money lands decides which inboxes are open first. What did the endorsement actually buy? The blunt question reporters and regulators asked was simple. Was there any ad, event, post, or appearance tied to the contract? Torre says searches and sources did not produce a single concrete activation. The belief clause offers a permissible reason for that silence, yet the absence itself becomes an analytic input. A marketing deal that never markets looks like a mechanism created to exist without noise, and mechanisms without noise are exactly what cap rules attempt to anticipate. If no work is visible, the work will be defined by structure. The number did not match the footprint. Tory reported that Kawhi's sum exceeded the combined total of other Aspiration celebrity agreements by more than fourfold. Ordinarily, a deal that size brings rollouts, affiliates, and measurable reach. Here, there were none. That mismatch between spend and signal turns silence into a clue. It also places unusual weight on the contract's wording, because without public activity to analyze, the text and the wires become the only artifacts left to read. Scale without signal is why audits start with terms and timing. Timeline overlaps drew a sharper outline. Weeks after Steve Ballmer invested roughly $50 million into Aspiration in 2021, the company signed a $300 million 23-year sponsorship with his Clippers. Alone, that can read like ordinary synergy between an investor and a partner. Once KL2 Aspire surfaced in bankruptcy court, the shape changed. Money moved both directions among a small cluster of entities while the largest personal deal remained unannounced. When circles of cash tighten, regulators check every boundary. Inside voices described the intent bluntly. Multiple former employees told Tory that the KL2 Aspire agreement functioned as a way to sidestep the cap. That claim becomes a lead, not a verdict, and leads demand documents. The league called cap circumvention the cardinal sin and announced a formal investigation on September 3, 2025. At that moment, the narrative left television debate and entered a structured process that values emails, drafts, and bank logs over anyone's opinion. Allegations are air until a paper trail gives them weight. The league's process targets paper, not posture. Once a probe opens, counsel interviews players, executives, and company officers. They search for consideration linked to roster outcomes and for communications that reveal intent. If a marketing deal was a marketing deal, it will look like one across multiple systems. If it was something else, the artifacts will harmonize differently. The CBA gives investigators authority to ask questions that must be answered with precision, not performance. Truth in these cases is reconstructed from timestamps. Penalties live in the CBA, not in hot takes. The last major cap circumvention case cost Minnesota 5 first-round picks, millions in fines, and suspensions. That history sets expectations for scale. Here, the elements are broader, with a failed fintech, federal charges, and an endorsement that allegedly required nothing at all. If the league proves intent and connection, punishments can void contracts and reshape futures. If it does not, the system will still log a warning for the next time. Precedent's not prediction, but it is a ruler for risk. Federal charges added weight the league cannot ignore. Aspiration co-founder Joe Sandberg pleaded guilty in August 2025 to wire fraud tied to hundreds of millions, while a board member admitted falsifying financials. Those timelines overlap the endorsement window. Federal agencies do not weigh star power. They weigh documents, inflows, outflows, and representations made to raise capital. If any of that intersects with sports contracts, league sanctions become only one layer of consequence. When the feds arrive, every ledger becomes a witness. Illusions are built from small, believable parts. The mechanics described in filings combine inflated metrics with optimistic decks to create momentum that feels real. Add a client list with famous names, and the snowball grows. A premium contract with no public footprint then functions like a status signal rather than a campaign plan. If insiders describe silence as expected, not accidental, auditors treat emptiness as design, and design as an operational choice that can be tested. What looks like nothing can be architecture in disguise. Old negotiations shape how new claims are read. Reports from 2019 described extraordinary asks and talks with Toronto. From pick-heavy deals to no-show sponsorships, and even equity conversations around a sister franchise. Every detail's contested, but repetition creates a pattern that frames how current events are interpreted. Patterns do not prove a rule break, yet they do inform how aggressively investigators map the edges this time. and what questions get asked first. Yesterday's lines often decide today's starting point. Availability numbers turn skepticism into fuel. Since joining the Clippers, Kawhi missed 206 of 472 regular season games and 15 of 50 postseason games by one widely cited count. That record amplified the optics critique. Minimal promotion, maximum caution, and limited visibility. A no-activation agreement then reads like harmony with the brand, not a glitch in execution. Optics still not the side cases, but they prime the audience that is watching. When the image is quiet, silence stops feeling accidental. Even the sneaker ads built the same silhouette. New Balance spots where Kawhi barely spoke reinforced influence without noise. That has marketing power. Yet it also means an 8-figure influence agreement that never surfaces looks consistent with the persona rather than contradictory. Consistency is not culpability. It's a lens. It changes how fans understand the story and how decision-makers expect the evidence. The land, once communications and contracts are compared side by side. Brain and paperwork dent the rhyme if the plan is real. Ballmer's defense created a different set of questions. In a televised interview, Steve Ballmer said he was conned by fraudulent financials and did not know endorsement specifics. He expressed embarrassment and framed himself as an investor who trusted bad numbers. That can be true and still raise governance issues. In a league context, due diligence is not a slogan, it's a responsibility. If oversight failed, the question becomes who was delegated, how they checked, and what they missed. Claiming deception does not cancel the duty to supervise. Hiring outside counsel signaled 5-alarm urgency. Retaining a premier firm that handled prior ownership crises told everyone this would not be a cursory review. Interviews will cross companies, calendars, and compliance teams. Subpoena-grade questions are not about opinions. They are about who knew what, when they knew it, and how decisions were recorded. The comparison to earlier cases is inevitable, but the architecture here is wider, smarter, and more entangled with external actors. Scale is a message when the league chooses its tools. What counts as proof in cap cases? Investigators do not hunt for a single smoking gun. They assemble a narrative from drafts, payment schedules, invoice language, and changes tracked by software. They align wire timestamps with meeting invites. Then compare that with public events and private emails. If a contract's terms map to roster leverage, the lines will connect, even when phrased in cautious legal language. If it was truly marketing, the evidence will show activation work. Causation is mapped, not declared, one artifact at a time. Media heat is not the same as evidentiary heat. Television panels reward confident conclusions. Investigations reward precision. An accusation draws clicks, but a sanction needs documents. That difference frustrates fans who want instant answers. Yet it is why past penalties survived appeals. The league cannot punish on vibes without losing in arbitration. It must show linkages that stand on their own, even if the public is already convinced by anecdotes and timelines. Outrage travels fast, but outcomes move on paperwork. Players and executives did not agree on the lesson. Some current and former players shrugged with pragmatism, arguing that everyone hunts edges and that influence deals exist in gray. Executives, speaking more carefully, stress the risk to competitive balance if private side doors become normalized. Owners, who've lived through sanctions, warn that the cost lands for years, not days. The split itself is a clue about incentives and how different groups measure risk against reward. The louder the split, the clearer the stakes become. Competitive balance is the league's center of gravity. Salary caps exist, so money cannot simply purchase titles without constraint. Creative finance that ties payments to player choices outside the cap can break that premise without touching a roster slot. That's why the rules define circumvention as a cardinal sin. Even the appearance of backdoor compensation pushes fans towards cynicism. And cynicism is expensive in a league that sells belief as much as it sells tickets. Protecting the cap protects the product people trust. The Clippers face a future priced in uncertainty. Draft capital's already been spent, and the arena arrives under a new cloud. If punishments hit, flexibility tightens just as rivals reload. The Lakers inherit a different risk. one where the on-court fit is electric while the narrative baggage is heavy. Either way, this case will shape reputations long after the last deposition is filed, because reputations decide options before any phone call is returned. Uncertainty is a tax team's pay and future opportunities. Luck and patience change the arc of the story. If not for a creditor list line that matched letters and a jersey number, none of this may have surfaced. That doesn't make the case stronger on its own, but it explains why obscure filings matter in sports reporting. In an ecosystem built on spectacle, the most significant moments sometimes arrive as PDFs with no pictures. Reporters follow those crumbs because governance often hides where the lights never point. A footnote can move more than any press conference. This may not be a one-off to the rulebook. Once auditors learn a pattern, they look for it elsewhere. If a structure exists that can pay privately while presenting publicly as benign, the league will scan for similar terms, entities, and routing across multiple teams. That does not mean a wave of sanctions is coming, but it means the detection surface expands. Future contracts will inherit tighter scrutiny because that is how systems harden after a scare. One case often writes the questions asked in the next. Whatever the outcome, precedent will be the product. A clear finding of circumvention will set penalties that echo in every future negotiation. A finding of no violation will still create a checklist for how to document legitimate influence deals without tripping alarms. Either way, owners, agents, and brands will adjust language and disclosures. Fans may not read the clauses, but they will feel the effects in who signs where and how numbers seem to make sense. Rules evolve in public after they're enforced in private. This is the last quiet breath before consequences. While interviews are scheduled and archives are combed, games continue and narratives multiply. Los Angeles will chase wins and the league will chase links. Both sides will insist the process is orderly. Underneath, it's a sprint against entropy because every day a headlines resets public framing. The only stable endpoint is documentation strong enough to be dull, and dull is exactly what lasts when challenged. Sooner or later, a document will speak louder than debate. The scoreboard everyone is watching is not the one above the floor. If a paper trail shows consideration linked to roster outcomes, precedent will be set that echoes through contracts, sponsorships, and ownership for years. If it does not, this becomes a cautionary parable about optics in a surveillance era. Either way, Los Angeles will chase rings while the league chases answers, and the next decisive possession may arrive in a conference room, not a fourth quarter. The game will go on. The question is what the rules will look like when it does. If the system hardens, it's because the files told it to.